Does the West depend more on Africa than it is willing to admit? Surprisingly, several African countries have begun to limit their exports to Western nations, rapidly shifting the balance of global power. What once seemed impossible is now becoming reality. Africa, instead of just trying to catch up, is putting the developed world in check. For years, Western economies assumed Africa would always be a reliable source of cheap resources such as oil, gold, uranium, and lithium, essential materials for their industries and technological advancements. From smartphones to electric vehicles, African resources were the hidden foundation of global progress. But this dynamic is changing. A growing number of African countries, at least 10 so far, have imposed strict restrictions on the export of raw materials, retaining most of the value within their territories, investing in local industries, and strengthening their economies. This is not a mere trade adjustment, but a profound shakeup that has caught Western powers by surprise. Africa is no longer a passive supplier. It takes control of its resources and decides how, when, and to whom to sell them. This shift carries both economic and political consequences, marking a decisive moment. After centuries of exploitation, Africa is reclaiming its sovereignty over its wealth. Ghana, one of the continent's leading gold producers, exemplifies this new stance. In a bold move, it demands that mining companies sell 1/5 of their refined gold directly to the central bank, aiming to increase its reserves and reduce dependence on foreign currency. This strategy goes beyond economics. It represents a direct challenge to the global system that has historically seen Africa only as a cheap source of raw materials. Ghana sends a clear message. They will no longer allow others to profit from their resources without giving back. This change also impacts major Western powers, which must quickly adapt to this new reality. The question now is how they will respond to this challenge. Africa not only demands fair conditions but is redefining the rules of the game. What consequences will this shift have for the future of global trade? The move toward economic autonomy in Africa is not an isolated phenomenon but part of a global movement transforming the foundations of international trade. Uganda, for example, has taken a radical step to ensure that the benefits of its green gold, coffee, remain within its borders. For years, farmers produced the beans, but the greatest profits went to large foreign corporations that bought them cheaply, processed them abroad, and sold them at much higher prices. Tired of this inequality, Uganda banned the export of raw agricultural products like coffee and tea, and now focuses on exporting processed, roasted, and packaged coffee ready for the international market. This decision has profound effects, not only economically but also socially. Uganda ceases to be just a raw material supplier and emerges as a key player in the coffee industry. By strengthening local production, it not only creates jobs in processing, but also increases its income and retains more value within the country. This transformation poses a direct challenge to major Western brands that have benefited from resource exploitation in countries like Uganda for years. These companies now face a complicated decision: pay more for processed coffee or seek alternative suppliers. What Uganda has achieved goes beyond a simple agricultural reform. It represents an exercise in economic autonomy that is transforming how Africa is viewed in the global economy. Why let big companies take their coffee cheaply while profits concentrate abroad? This question drives Uganda's new policies and redefines the debate about economic fairness for Africa. It is not just Uganda. Nations like Gabon are also adopting similar measures to better leverage their natural resources. For example, Gabon, a major timber exporter, banned the export of unprocessed logs since 2010, forcing wood to be locally processed. This strategy has generated jobs, diversified the economy, and reduced dependence on exports without added value. The benefits are clear. Gabon now earns profits from manufactured products like furniture and building materials, leaving behind the role of a mere raw material supplier. This change impacts European and Asian companies, which must review their supply chains and face higher costs for processed products from Gabon. Countries like Gabon, Uganda, and Ghana demonstrate that Africa can stop being a passive supplier and take control to build stronger, self-sufficient economies. By making these brave decisions to keep the value of their resources within their borders, the effect on Western economies is felt. Companies that once enjoyed cheap African resources now face higher costs, tighter margins, and less stable supply chains. The era of easy, unrestricted access to African resources is coming to an end. Africa is no longer just a source of raw materials. It is taking the reins of its economic future and radically changing the power dynamics and global perception of the continent. A clear example of this transformation is Niger, one of the largest uranium producers, which has put France in a difficult position. For years, French nuclear power plants, which generate about 70% of the country's energy, have relied on cheap uranium from Niger. However, Niger has decided to change the rules by imposing export restrictions on this resource. This measure is not only economic, but a direct challenge to a historic relationship in which Niger gained little while. France benefited greatly. Now, Niger demands a fair price for its uranium and breaks with a dependence that has only brought poverty and backwardness. France, surprised, faces rising costs for its nuclear energy, revealing how dependent the West had become on African resources, something that had remained hidden until now. Niger's decision has much broader implications. It is an act of sovereignty and historical justice, claiming the right to decide how and at what price its wealth is exploited. The message is clear. If Western nations want to continue accessing African resources, they must adjust to the rules the continent now imposes. This trend is not unique. Across Africa, several countries are making similar decisions. Gabon and Uganda have already taken the first step, and now Niger is doing so with uranium. Africa is increasingly determined to control its own economic destiny. This African awakening is also transforming how large international corporations manage their supply chains. For years, Western companies enjoyed cheap resources, but now they face new challenges. Prices are rising, supply chains are disrupted, and profits that once flowed abroad remain closer to home. This particularly affects sectors like electric vehicles, which depend on African minerals such as lithium and cobalt. Namibia, for example, has marked a turning point by limiting lithium exports, an essential mineral for these vehicles' batteries. Instead of selling the raw mineral, the country is betting on developing its own processing industry, requiring foreign companies to invest in local infrastructure. In this way, Namibia not only looks to the future, but leads the energy transition. From its territory, strengthening its economic sovereignty and avoiding exploitation without benefits for its people. This change goes beyond economics. It is about power and dignity. Africa no longer wants to be seen just as a source of raw materials, but demands a seat at the global table, altering power structures that have endured for centuries. It is not just an economic struggle, but an uprising against a system that considered Africa merely a resource colony. The continent wants to decide its own future and ensure its wealth benefits its inhabitants first. The impact of this transformation is felt beyond Africa. As regulation over the export of key resources increases, the world faces a new reality shaking the global economy. Countries like Zimbabwe, Mozambique, and Guinea show how changing resource policies can transform their economies, reduce dependence on external aid, and prevent their wealth from leaving without local benefits. This African advance in controlling its resources challenges Western economic hegemony and sets a new standard for global trade. In Zimbabwe, for example, the government banned the export of raw chrome, a vital mineral for stainless steel and specialized chemicals. For years, foreign companies bought cheap chrome, processed it abroad, and earned huge profits. Now, Zimbabwe demands that the benefits go first to its population. This generates employment, boosts local industry, and ensures that the country fully leverages its natural wealth instead of being a resource-rich nation, but economically poor. As expected, international companies that previously benefited from cheap exploitation have had to adapt by raising prices and seeking other suppliers. These changes are not isolated. They reflect a global movement that is redefining the rules of international trade. Gabon, an African country rich in natural resources, has chosen to ban the export of unprocessed timber. Before this measure, Gabon only supplied wood to European and Asian industries, but now it seeks to add value within its borders. By promoting its local industry, it not only generates employment and strengthens its economy, but also challenges the model that allowed large foreign companies to extract resources without benefiting the local population. This policy is changing the global perception of Africa and forcing international companies to rethink their strategies. Africa will no longer be a passive supplier of raw materials. It is taking control of its future so that its wealth benefits its inhabitants first before external economies. The big question is whether Western powers are prepared to accept this change. For decades, they have enjoyed African resources at low cost and now face a profound transformation in supply chains. This new control over their resources implies not only economic changes, but also geopolitical ones. Western nations must decide whether to adapt to this new reality or continue resisting, risking losing access to essential resources. Sovereignty is at the heart of this transformation. African countries claim the right to decide how, at what price, and to whom they sell their resources, seeking that the benefits reach their population and not just foreign companies. We are witnessing the end of an era of Western economic dominance and the beginning of a more significant role for Africa on the global stage. This change is not just commercial, but a profound adjustment in global power relations. The international community is watching closely, and this movement also sparks a global debate about economic justice, sovereignty, and equity in trade. The old exploitation model is being replaced by a fairer vision, where Africa ensures that its wealth drives its own development. Now I ask you, the listener, do you think Western powers will accept this new order, or will they continue trying to impose their rules, risking losing access to key resources? Share your opinion in the comments and join this discussion. Africa is claiming its place in the world, and the future of global trade may depend on how we respond to this challenge.